My name is Kara, and I was 38 the Christmas my mother-in-law looked at my 7-year-old daughter and told her to go wait outside in the snow. We were standing in the front hall of the Keller house, the one with the big wreath on the door and the candles in every window. The other grandchildren had just been called into the living room to open their presents, and when my Lily, in her little red coat, started to follow them, my mother-in-law put a soft hand on her shoulder and said, in the gentlest, most poisonous voice you can imagine, "Not you. Sweetheart, this part's just for the grandchildren. Why don't you wait out on the porch?" The porch. It was 19 degrees out. There was snow coming down, and my daughter looked up at me with those big, confused eyes, trying to understand what she'd done wrong. And I felt something inside me that had been bending for 6 years finally, quietly, stop bending. What none of them knew, what not one of them ever bothered to ask, was that there was an envelope in my coat pocket. I'd brought it as a Christmas gift, the kind of gift that would have changed their whole lives. I just hadn't planned, until that exact moment, on changing what it would mean when I handed it over. Welcome to Composed Drama Stories, where the women everyone underestimated finally tell their side. If quiet strength and slow justice are your kind of evening, stay with me. Let me put you in that hallway, because I want you to feel the cold of it. My husband Ben was in the kitchen carrying a tray. He hadn't seen it happen. His brother Kevin's 2 kids, Tyler and Ava, were already piling toward the tree, squealing. And there stood my Lily, frozen between the warm living room and the front door, holding a present she'd wrapped herself in paper with little snowmen on it. A present for her grandparents. She'd worked on the bough for 20 minutes that morning. My mother-in-law, Pat, just smiled and gave her shoulder a little turn toward the door. And I knelt down and I helped my daughter zip her coat back up, and I said, "It's okay, baby. We're going to go in a minute." And then I stood up and I reached into my coat pocket and I took out the envelope. But before I tell you what I did with it, you need to understand how I ended up on that porch in the first place. You need to understand who the Kellers were and exactly what it had cost me for 6 years to keep trying to be let in. I met Ben when Lily was 2. Her biological father had been gone since before she could remember he left when she was a baby. And he stayed gone, and I stopped waiting for him a long time ago. So for the first couple of years, it was just me and Lily, a single mom and a toddler in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I had made my peace with that being our whole story. And then Ben Keller walked into the pediatric clinic where I work as a nurse practitioner, holding his nephew who had a fever. And he was kind to the front desk staff in a way men usually aren't. And he asked me 3 follow-up questions about a kid who wasn't even his. We started talking. And within a year, I knew. Not just that I loved him, that Lily loved him, that he got down on the floor with her and let her put barrettes in his hair and never once made her feel like she was a package deal he was tolerating to get to me. We married when Lily was 3. And from the very first holiday, I could feel the Kellers sorting us. Because the Kellers were a blood family. That's the only way I know how to say it. They had a way of talking about lineage, about who came from who, that I'd never encountered before. Pat, my mother-in-law, kept a framed family tree in the hallway. Roy, my father-in-law, told the same stories about his grandfather every Thanksgiving. They ran a restaurant, Keller's Kitchen, a supper club that had been in the family 30 years, the kind of place where the whole town came for the Friday fish fry, and they talked about it like a bloodline, like a crown that would one day pass to the rightful heirs. And from the start, Lily was not, in their eyes, an heir. It was never loud. That's the thing about this kind of cruelty, it's never loud enough to point at. It was in the details. The first Christmas, Tyler and Ava Kevin's kids, the blood grandkids, each had a stack of presents under the tree with their names on them. Lily had one, a coloring book. Pat handed it to her and said, "We didn't really know what you'd be into, dear." Lily was 3. She was into everything a 3-year-old is into. They just hadn't bothered to ask. It was in the photos. Every family gathering, Pat would gather the grandchildren for a picture, and somehow Lily was always the one holding the dog, or standing a step back, or not quite in the frame. I have a whole phone full of Keller family photos where my daughter is a half-second too far to the left. It was in the words, "Your real grandchildren." I heard Pat say it on the phone once, to her sister, not knowing I was in the next room. "Oh, Kevin's bringing the real grandkids Sunday." Like Lily was a counterfeit. And it was in that family tree in the hallway. I noticed it the second year, while I was waiting for Ben to find his coat. It was one of those big calligraphy charts in a gold frame, the kind you order from a genealogy place, and Pat was so proud of it. Roy's grandfather at the top, branches coming down through the decades, every Keller accounted for. Tyler was on it. Ava was on it. Ava had been born the year before, and she was already inked in, a fresh little leaf at the bottom. And Lily wasn't there. There was a blank space next to Ben's name where a child should go, and it just stayed blank, year after year, while a framed chart in the front hall quietly told every visitor who walked through that door exactly who the Kellers counted and who they didn't. I never said anything about it. That's the part I have to own. I'd stand in that hallway and feel my stomach drop, and then I'd put my company smile back on and go eat pot roast. There was a birthday, too. Lily's 5th. We had a little party at our house. And Roy and Pat came. And they brought Ava a present. Ava. Not Lily, it wasn't Ava's birthday. It was Lily's, but Pat had grabbed something for Ava on the way, so she wouldn't feel left out. So at my daughter's own birthday party, the blood grandchild got a gift to keep her from feeling left out, and the birthday girl got a card with a 20 in it and a pat on the head. Lily was 5. She noticed. 5-year-olds notice everything. She came and found me in the kitchen and asked, very quietly, why Grandma brought Ava a toy. And I didn't have an answer that a 5-year-old should ever have to hear, so I just hugged her and told her it was a mix-up. And there was the Thanksgiving Lily was 6 by then, where Pat lined all the children up on the staircase for the picture she took every year. Grandkids on the steps. She called, the way she always did. And Tyler and Ava scrambled up, and Lily started to climb up with them. The most natural thing in the world, and Pat said, "Oh, honey, why don't you go help your mom in the kitchen? This is just a quick grandkids one. Just a quick grandkids one." My 6-year-old climbed back down those stairs and walked into the kitchen and stood next to me at the sink. And she didn't cry. And she didn't ask why. And that was so much worse than if she had. Because it meant she was starting to learn it. She was starting to understand the rule of that house. And a child should never have to learn that the people who are supposed to love them have a list. And her name isn't on it. That was the night I came closest to saying something. I had the words right in my throat. And then I looked across the room at Ben, laughing at something his dad said, happy to be home. And I swallowed them. For him. Always for him. I told myself keeping the peace was the loving thing. I'm telling you now it wasn't. It was just easier for the adults, and harder for the smallest person in the room. And here's the thing that kept me on that porch all those years. Knocking Ben. Because Ben saw it too, and it tore him in half. He'd grown up worshiping these people. They were his parents, and every time I'd try to talk to him about it, gently, late at night, he'd get this look like a kid caught between two people he loved, and he'd say, "I'll talk to them, Kara. They don't mean it like that. Dad's old school. Mom she's set in her ways." And he would talk to them. And nothing would change. And I learned to stop bringing it up, because watching it hurt him felt like one more thing I was costing him by being a woman who came with a daughter. So I told myself it was on me to fix it. If I just loved them hard enough, if I made myself so woven into this family that they couldn't picture it without me, the chart in the hallway would fill itself in. That was the bargain I made in my own head, and I kept my end of it for 6 years. I never once let myself ask the question underneath it, the question that, looking back, was the only one that mattered. Why was the price of admission always paid by my daughter, and never by them? And here is the part I'm not proud of. For 6 years, I absorbed all of it. I made excuses. They're old-fashioned. They'll come around. They just need time to bond. I told myself that if I was patient enough, if I was helpful enough, if I made myself useful enough to this family, they would eventually see my daughter the way the rest of the world saw her, which is to say, as the funniest, kindest, most wide-open-hearted kid you'd ever meet. I thought love was something you could earn if you just kept paying into it. I was about to find out exactly how wrong I was. But first, let me tell you what I'd been paying. Because here's what the Kellers didn't know about their proud, self-made, bloodline family. For the last 2 years, they'd been quietly kept afloat by the very daughter-in-law they couldn't quite count as real. It started when Roy's heart trouble began. He had to step back from the restaurant, couldn't work the long hours anymore, and Keller's kitchen started to slip. The town still came for the fish fry, but costs were up, and Roy wasn't there to run a tight ship, and they fell behind on the business loan. A business loan is just like any other loan, except the bank had it secured against the restaurant itself. Fall behind far enough, and the bank can do something called calling the loan demanding the entire balance at once. And if you can't pay it, they take the thing the loan was tied to. They take the restaurant. The Kellers were headed straight for that cliff, and they were too proud to say a word. But Ben handled the family books. He'd always been the responsible son, the one good with numbers, and he saw it coming. He came to me one night 2 years ago, sick with worry, and he said, "Kara, I think Mom and Dad are going to lose the restaurant. And they'll die before they'll ask anyone for help. I want you to sit with what I did next, because this is the part I keep turning over." I had every reason in the world to say, "That's their problem, Ben. Let them ask. Maybe if they need us, they'll finally treat your daughter like a person." That would have been fair. Nobody would have blamed me. I didn't say that. I looked at my husband's face, at how scared he was for his parents, and I said, "Okay, how much do they need?" So, we made a decision. Together, quietly, we started covering the loan payments, about $1,900 a month, every month, drafted out of our own account, so the bank stayed off their backs. We never told them the full amount. We let Roy believe business had simply picked back up. We protected their pride, because that's what you do for family, and yes, I thought of them as my family, even then, even after everything. It became this strange monthly ritual. On the 1st, the money would leave our account, and I'd update my spreadsheet, and we'd say nothing. And the next Sunday at dinner, Roy would be in a good mood, going on about how the supper club had turned a corner, how the Friday crowd was back, how he'd always known they'd be fine. And I'd sit there and smile and pass the potatoes, knowing the only corner that had been turned was the one where our money went into his bank instead of his customers. I never corrected him. Not once. I let him keep his pride. I told myself that was love. And maybe it was. I remember one of those Sundays in particular, because it's the kind of thing that should have woken me up sooner. Roy was carving the roast, telling a story about how some restaurant a few towns over had gone under, shaking his head about it. "That's what happens," he said, "when people don't run a tight ship. We've never missed a payment on anything in 30 years. Not one." And he said it proud, looking right around the table. Ben stared at his plate. I'd written that month's $1,900 transfer into my spreadsheet 4 days before. And down the table, Lily, who'd been told there wasn't room for her in the staircase photo, was quietly coloring on the paper placemat, because nobody had thought to set her up with anything to do. I looked at my father-in-law, taking credit for a record we were paying to protect, and at my daughter making herself small at the far end of a table she belonged at. And I felt the first real crack in the story I'd been telling myself. I shut it back down. It would be almost a year before that crack became the thing that walked me out the door. There was one close call. About a year in, Pat got curious about the books. She'd never been the numbers person, but a friend of hers had gotten scammed, and it spooked her, and she asked Ben if she could see the accounts sometime. Ben came home gray-faced. If she saw the accounts, she'd see the transfers. She'd see our names. And we sat at our kitchen table and realized we had a choice. Let them find out, and probably refuse all of it out of pride. Or bury it deeper. We buried it. Ben set up the payments to route through a way that looked, on a quick glance, like ordinary restaurant revenue. We hid our own generosity. That's how badly we wanted them to never feel small. Looking back, I think that's the saddest part of this whole story, how hard we worked to protect the dignity of people who wouldn't spare a coloring book's worth of dignity for our child. I kept a ledger, not to hold over anyone. I just keep records. It's how I'm built. 2 years of payments, line by line, in a little spreadsheet, every transfer dated and totaled. By that Christmas, Ben and I had quietly poured close to $45,000 into keeping Keller's kitchen alive. $45,000. That's a kitchen remodel. That's 2 years of college. That's a down payment. It was money we could have spent 100 ways on our own little family. And instead it went, dollar by quiet dollar, into a restaurant that had a framed chart in its owner's hallway that didn't have my daughter's name on it. And the restaurant still owed about $70,000 on the loan. And the bank was finally losing patience, and we knew the slow monthly drip wasn't going to be enough anymore. The bank had started sending the harder letters. Roy didn't know Ben intercepted those too. We were running out of runway, and we both knew it. So we'd made one more decision. The big one. We decided to pay the whole thing off. All $70,000. As a Christmas gift, we took out a home equity loan to do it. That means we borrowed against our own house, put our own roof on the line because we didn't have $70,000 sitting in a savings account. But we had a home with equity in it, and 2 parents about to lose everything they'd built. I want to be clear about what that meant, because it matters to how the night ended. We weren't rich. We were a nurse and an engineer who saved carefully and drove old cars. To do this, we were taking on a second loan against our own home, the home where Lily slept, and we were going to spend the next decade paying it back. We talked about it for 3 weeks. We ran the numbers a dozen times at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed. And every time, Ben would look at me and say, "Are you sure after how they treat her?" And every time I'd say, "They're your parents. It's the restaurant. We can do this." Because I still believed, God help me, that this was the bridge, that this was the gift big enough to finally make them see us. I'd gone to the bank that very week and gotten a cashier's check made out to the lender. A cashier's check is a guaranteed check, backed by the bank itself, as good as handing over cash. I remember the teller sliding it across the counter, $70,000 on one piece of paper, and how my hand actually shook a little picking it up. $70,000, sitting in an envelope in my coat pocket, with a little card that said, "Merry Christmas, Mom and Dad. The restaurant is yours, free and clear, forever. Love, Ben, Kara, and Lily." Love, Ben, Kara, and Lily. I had put my daughter's name on the gift that was going to save their life's work, because in my heart, she was theirs, even if they'd never said it. I'd let Lily help me pick out the card. She didn't know what was inside it, she just knew it was a big, important present for Grandma and Grandpa, and she'd chosen the one with the cardinal in the snow on the front, because she said the bird looked friendly. That was the envelope in my pocket. That's what I'd driven through the snow to give them. I had let myself imagine it the whole way over. The wipers going, Lily singing along to the radio in the backseat, Pat opening it, the slow understanding crossing her face. Roy's eyes filling up, the two of them finally turning to look at our little family and seeing us. Really seeing us. I had let myself believe that this Christmas was going to be the one where the blank space on that family tree finally got a name in it. I thought maybe this was the thing that would do it. I thought maybe you really could love your way in, and then my mother-in-law told my 7-year-old to go wait in the snow. I should tell you how that morning started, because it makes what came after hurt worse, and I think you should feel the whole drop. Lily had been up since 6. She was beside herself, not about her own presents, but about giving Grandma and Grandpa the big envelope. She'd asked me 3 times in the car if she could be the one to hand it over. She had on her good red coat, and the little reindeer barrettes Ben had clipped in her hair, crooked, the way he always did them. The whole drive there, through the snow, I let myself hope. I genuinely thought, this is the morning it turns. I pictured it so clearly I could taste it. We got there, and it was already off. You can feel it, that temperature in a house. Tyler and Ava's presents were stacked in 2 big mountains under the tree. There was a small, sad pile to one side, and I clocked it the way you clock a bruise. That'll be the everybody else pile, the leftover gift pile. Pat hugged Ben a beat too long and gave me the cheek air kiss and looked right past Lily. Roy was in his chair, and the morning rolled along on its rails, the way it always did, until Pat clapped her hands and called the children in to open gifts and reached out and stopped the one child in a red coat who'd brought a present she'd made herself. So let me take you back to that hallway, with the envelope in my hand. I want to tell you that I made a grand speech. I didn't. The thing that happened inside me wasn't a flare of rage. It was the opposite. It was a kind of terrible clarity, like a window you've been looking through for years suddenly being wiped clean. And you finally see the room for what it actually is. Here's what I noticed, standing there. The front door was still cracked open from where Pat had gestured Lily toward it, and the cold was pouring in across the floor, around our ankles. Real winter cold. The kind that means business in Minnesota in late December. I could hear the other kids in the living room, Tyler shouting about a video game he'd unwrapped. Ava laughing, wrapping paper tearing. Warm yellow light coming out of that doorway, and my daughter standing in the cold draft in her red coat, with her snowman paper present still in her hands, looking up at me, trying to read my face, to know how scared she should be. And I saw 6 years all at once. The coloring book, the blank space on the family tree, the grandkids on the steps, the half-second too far to the left, the real grandkids, and now this a child in a red coat being sent out the door so she wouldn't dirty up the blood grandchildren's Christmas morning. And I understood all the way down to the floor of myself that there was no amount of patience, no amount of usefulness, no $70,000 gift that was ever going to make these people pull my daughter in out of the snow. They had decided who counted a long time ago. And no envelope was going to change their math. But the envelope could still change mine. So I did the calmest thing I have ever done. I held it out to Pat, and I said, Pat, before we go, this is for you and Roy. It was going to be your Christmas gift. I want you to open it tonight, after we've left. All of it. Every page. She took it, surprised by the weight in my voice, and she said, Kara, what's gotten into you? It's just a little holiday thing with the kids. Don't be so sensitive. And I said, I know. That's exactly the problem. And I didn't raise my voice. And I didn't cry, even though I wanted to. I crouched down and I finished zipping Lily's coat all the way to her chin. And I took her hand, and I called for Ben, who came out of the kitchen still holding a dish towel. Confused, we're going home, I told him, in a voice he'd never heard me use. And to his everlasting credit, my husband looked at his mother's face and at our daughter's coat zipped up to her chin, and he didn't ask a single question. He just got our coats, and we walked out the front door, past the porch where they'd tried to leave my child, and into the snow. And we drove home. The snow was coming harder now, the headlights full of it, and for the first few miles nobody said anything. Then, Ben reached over in the dark and put his hand on mine on the gear shift, and I told him quietly what his mother had done, and I felt his hand go still. He didn't get angry, not the loud kind. He just said, after a long moment, she zipped her coat up to leave. I saw that, and I didn't even know yet. And then, quieter, I should have seen all of it a long time ago. And I told him the truth that he'd been seeing it through the eyes of a little boy who loved his mom and dad. And that's not a crime, it's just a thing you have to grow out of. And then, from the back seat, that small voice. Mommy, did I do something bad? I'll tell you what I told her, because it's the truest thing I said that whole night. I turned around at a red light so she could see my face, so she'd know I meant it. And I said, no, baby, you didn't do one single thing wrong. Some grown-ups get confused about what a family is. They think it's about who you're born to. But that's not what it is. A family is the people who keep you warm and pull you in close. And you and me and Daddy, we know that. We were never confused. Not for 1 second. And she thought about that, the way kids do, and then she asked if we could get hot chocolate. And we did, and that was the end of the conversation for her, the beautiful resilience of a 7-year-old. She fell asleep in the back seat before we got home, the snowman present still in her lap, the one she'd made for her grandparents, the one she never got to give. I carried her in and put her to bed in her coat because I couldn't bear to wake her. And then I sat at my own kitchen table, in the quiet, and I did not sleep because I knew what I had left behind in that envelope. And I knew that when Pat opened it, 6 years of a careful story was going to come apart. Part of me wanted to call and stop it. Part of me felt sick. And then I'd think about that staircase, that just a quick grandkids one, and the coat zipped to the chin, and the sickness would settle into something steadier. Something like resolve. I had spent 6 years being the one who kept the peace. That night, for the first time, I let the peace break. And while my daughter slept down the hall, the envelope I'd left behind began doing its quiet work. Here's the thing I have to confess about that envelope, because it's the part that tells you who I really am underneath all the smiling and the pot roast. It wasn't only the check and the cheerful little card in there. Folded behind them were 2 more things, 2 things I'd put in days earlier, hoping with everything in me that I'd never have a reason to leave them. Some quiet, tired part of me, after 6 years on that porch, had already known this gift might not buy what I wanted it to buy, so I'd prepared, the way I always prepare, for the version of the night where love wasn't enough. And then I'd prayed I was wrong. The first thing was a letter, in my own handwriting, written at my kitchen table the week before, while Lily slept down the hall. The second was a certified copy of Lily's adoption decree. I'd had it made that fall officially, for the school and the insurance, a stamped court copy. Ben legally adopted Lily 2 years ago. We'd done it the real way, in a courtroom, with a judge, the best day of our lives. And the thing about adoption that the Kellers had spent 6 years pretending wasn't true is this: in the eyes of the law, there is no such thing as not really. When Ben adopted Lily, she became his daughter completely, permanently, with every single right a child born to him would have. The law doesn't keep a smaller, lesser drawer for adopted children. There is no blood exception, no asterisk, no probationary period. By the time Pat told her to wait on the porch, Lily had been, for 2 years, as fully Roy and Pat Keller's legal grandchild as Tyler and Ava ever were. Every time they said the real grandkids, they weren't just being cruel. They were factually, legally wrong. So in that hallway, with 90 seconds and a clarity I'd never felt before, I didn't have to write a thing. I just had to decide whether to hand them the hopeful envelope or the whole envelope. And I handed them the whole thing, every page, and told them to read all of it. The check they'd been about to receive, the proof of what we'd been carrying, and the court's stamp on the truth they'd refused for 6 years, that the child they'd just left in the snow was theirs. And then the letter. I want to tell you roughly what it said, because Ben told me later how it landed, and I've never forgotten the picture of it. The letter said, "This check is for $70,000. It was going to pay off the loan on Keller's kitchen tonight and save it forever. Ben and I have been quietly making your loan payments for 2 years. I've enclosed the record. Every month of it, because we couldn't bear to watch you lose the thing you built. And because we love you. I was going to hand you this gift and never tell you how much it was, to protect your pride, the way we always have." And then, it said, "But I won't be doing that now. I cannot keep spending my family's security to take care of people who would put my 7-year-old daughter out in the cold. I am not doing this out of revenge. I'm doing it because tonight I finally understood that you were never going to see her, no matter what I gave you. So I'm going to stop giving. The check goes back to the bank tomorrow morning. What happens to the restaurant after that is between you and your lender, the same lender you've been able to ignore for 2 years, only because of us." And the last line, the one Ben said his mother read 3 times, "Lily is your granddaughter." A judge already said so. The only people who ever doubted it were the 2 of you. We won't be back. If that ever changes, it will have to start with an apology to a little girl who did absolutely nothing but love you. I handed it over. I walked out, and then, for the first time in 6 years, the Kellers had to sit with the truth instead of the version they'd decided to tell. Now here is where the slow part of slow justice comes in. Because I didn't see any of what happened next. I'd left. I was home, watching my daughter sleep. The reckoning happened in that warm living room without me in it, and honestly, that's the part I'm proudest of. I didn't need to be there to win. I'd already done the only thing that mattered. I'd taken my daughter's hand and chosen her, out loud, in front of all of them. This is what Ben's brother Kevin told us later. After we left, the house got strange and quiet. The way Kevin told it, Pat sat down at the kitchen table to open the envelope while the kids were still tearing into their presents in the other room. That bright wrapping paper chaos going on while she slid her thumb under the flap. She was expecting a Christmas card. Maybe, at most, a chilly note about manners. Instead, the first thing that slid out was the check. $70,000, the bank's name across the top, made out to the lender that held the restaurant. Kevin said she stared at it for a long moment, like it was written in another language. Then came the spreadsheet, 2 years of payments, every $1,900 transfer, dated and totaled $45,000 at the bottom, in my plain little font. Then the court document, with the state seal and Lily's full name and the word decree. And then the letter, folded in thirds. Roy came in from the living room to see why she'd gone so quiet. He read over her shoulder. And Kevin said the 2 of them just sat there, the noise of their grandchildren's Christmas spilling out of the next room, while the whole shape of the last 2 years rearranged itself in front of them. The restaurant they'd told everyone had turned a corner. The corner had been us. The good years that weren't good. The pride they'd been allowed to keep, that we'd bought and paid for so they'd never feel small. All of it laid out on the table next to a check they were never going to get to cash. Pat got to a certain line and couldn't read anymore. Her hands were shaking too hard. So she set the letter down on the table. Kevin, the favored son, the father of the blood grandkids, Kevin was the one who picked the letter up and read it out loud. The whole thing. To the room. And the room, Ben pieced together later from a couple of different people, went dead silent as he did. Dana, Kevin's wife, quietly took Tyler and Ava upstairs partway through, because some things children shouldn't have to hear about another child. Roy lowered himself into a kitchen chair and didn't get back up. And Kevin's voice, which had started out almost amused, like he was about to read some dramatic note from his oversensitive sister-in-law, got slower and lower with every line, until the only sound in that house was him reading my handwriting into a silence that had been 30 years in the making. And here's the part I never expected. The part that turned this from a sad story into a true one. Kevin had no idea. None of it. He didn't know the restaurant had nearly gone under. He didn't know that Ben and I had been the ones keeping it alive for 2 years. He'd spent that whole time believing his parents were doing fine, believing the family was solid, believing the restaurant was just chugging along the way it always had. He had been enjoying the comfortable story right along with everyone else. And he'd never asked who was paying for it. And when he got to the line about putting Lily out in the cold, he stopped reading, and he looked at his mother, and he said Ben heard this part. Because Kevin called him an hour later. His voice shaking, he said, "Mom, did you really make Ben's little girl go wait outside? On Christmas?" And Pat said something about tradition, about the grandchildren, and Kevin cut her off. Kevin, the golden son, the one whose kids always got the big stack of presents. He said, "She's 7, Mom, she's 7, and you sent her into the snow. And this whole time, that girl's mother was about to hand you $70,000. That was the moment the family's story broke in half. Not because of anything I said. Because Kevin, the one ally they were sure they had, the keeper of the blood grandkids, turned around and saw exactly what his parents were and couldn't unsee it. The consequences came the way real consequences come. Slowly, and from their own choices, not from any move of mine. I took the cashier's check back to the bank the next morning, like I said I would. I sat in the same chair where the teller had handed it to me a week before, and I handed it back, and she canceled it. And that was that. $70,000 unspent. I won't pretend that was easy. That was our home equity, our risk, and we'd taken it on gladly for people we loved. For about a week afterward, I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and wonder if I'd done a terrible thing. And then I'd remember a 7-year-old in a red coat being turned toward a door, and I'd go back to sleep. I will not light my own house on fire to keep warm a family that won't let my child in the door. We paid the home equity loan back down. We kept our roof, we kept our money, we kept our peace. And without us, the restaurant's loan came due. The way it had always been going to. This is the part people don't understand about that kind of help once you're holding something up. The day you stop, it falls at the speed it was always going to fall. The bank had been patient for 2 years only because the payments kept arriving. When they stopped, the patience stopped with them. The hard letters Ben used to intercept started landing in Roy's own mailbox, in Roy's own hands, for the first time. By February, the bank had called the loan. By spring, Kellers' Kitchen 30 years, the Friday fish fry, the family tree, the bloodline crown had a notice in the window. There was an auction. I heard about it secondhand, from a neighbor who didn't know the whole story, who just said wasn't it a shame about the supper club. The tables and the big flat-top griddle and the sign Roy was so proud of, all of it sold off on a Saturday morning to strangers. I felt a lot of things that day. I felt the ghost of the woman I'd been, the one who'd have done anything to save it. I felt sad for Roy, who'd built something real and lost it. But I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story where I wanted anybody to lose their restaurant. It's a story where I finally stopped being willing to trade my daughter's dignity to keep it open. It was theirs to lose. It had been ours to save. And they had told my child to go stand in the snow rather than let her watch Ava open a present. You reap what you refuse to value. Kevin called Ben that same night, about an hour after we got home. I was sitting at the kitchen table when the phone rang, and I watched Ben's face as he listened. Kevin was crying, Ben told me afterward. A grown man, the golden son, crying on Christmas night. He kept saying he was sorry. He said, "I didn't know about any of it, man. The money, the restaurant, none of it. And the thing with Lily, I've seen it for years, and I told myself it was just mom being mom. I let it happen. At your kid's expense. I'm so sorry. And Ben, who had spent his whole life being the responsible brother who never asked his big brother for anything, just said, I know. I know you didn't know. Two brothers, on the phone, finally telling each other the truth at 40 years old. Kevin called Ben a lot in those months. Their whole relationship changed. Kevin kept saying he didn't understand how he'd missed at the restaurant, the money, all of it, and Ben kept telling him that was the point, that we'd worked hard to make sure nobody saw. But the part Kevin couldn't get past wasn't the money. It was the porch. He had a daughter the same age as Lily. He kept saying, I keep picturing Ava out there in the cold, Ben. I keep picturing it. And eventually, Kevin and his wife Dana came around to our side, all the way. Their kids Tyler and Ava, they play with Lily now. Cousins the way cousins should be. No half step back. No holding the dog. Nobody a step too far to the left in the photos. Dana drove 2 hours to sit on my couch one afternoon. And she cried and apologized for every picture she'd let happen, every gathering where she'd seen it and said nothing. She said, I told myself it wasn't my business. But it was Lily's birthday, and I watched them give Ava the toy, and I said nothing. That mattered to me more than I can say. Not because I needed the apology. Because Lily got her cousins out of it, real ones. And that's a kind of family that can't be taken at a door. Roy and Pat, I don't talk to. Not out of bitterness, I'm past bitterness, but because the letter meant exactly what it said. The door isn't nailed shut. But it opens in one direction, and it starts with one thing. An apology to a little girl who did nothing but love them. Roy came by the house exactly once, that spring, after the restaurant closed. He stood on my porch, this time turning his hat in his hands, and he said he'd come to talk about the misunderstanding with the money. The money. Not the child. He'd lost his restaurant and driven all the way over, and the thing he came to discuss was the $70,000. I told him, kindly, that the money was never the misunderstanding, and that he knew where Lily was if he ever wanted to apologize to her. And I closed the door. Pat sent a card the next Christmas, a generic one, signed just Pat and Roy, no mention of Lily at all. I didn't open it in front of my daughter. Some things you don't hand a child. This past Christmas, we started something new. We host now our house, our table, no head of it. Kevin and Dana drive up with Tyler and Ava, and we do presents all together. Every kid in one happy pile. Nobody sorted. Nobody on the porch. And I bought a frame. A plain wooden one. Inside it isn't a calligraphy chart of who came from who. It's just a photo from that morning, all 4 kids in a heap on the floor in their pajamas, wrapping paper everywhere, Lily dead center, because she pushed her way into the middle the way 7-year-olds do, grinning with a tooth missing. It hangs in our hallway now. That's our family tree. Everybody in it climbed in on their own, and nobody had to bleed to belong. So let me leave you with what I learned. Standing in that hallway with $70,000 in my pocket, and my daughter zipping her coat back up. For 6 years, I thought love was a door I could earn my way through, if I just paid enough patience, enough usefulness, enough money. I thought if I made myself indispensable, they'd finally count my daughter as real. And the cruelest, simplest truth I came to that night is this. You cannot buy your way into people who have already decided you don't belong. You can spend your whole life on that porch, knocking, paying, hoping, and they will keep the door shut. And they will let you keep paying for the warmth inside while your child stands in the cold. So stop knocking. A child should never have to audition for a grandparent's love. And neither, it turns out, should you have to audition for anyone's. The day someone makes your kid stand out in the snow, the question is no longer how do I make them accept us. The question is, why am I still standing on this porch at all? Real family isn't the people who keep a list of who counts as blood. Real family is whoever reaches out and pulls your child in out of the cold without being asked. By that measure, I'd been confused for 6 years about where my family actually was, and it was never inside that house. It was the man carrying the tray who'd made a daughter his own in a courtroom. It was the little girl asleep in the back seat. It turned out to be Kevin and Dana once they finally saw. My family was every person who looked at Lily and didn't see a counterfeit they saw a kid. Which is all she ever was. All she ever needed anyone to see. I stopped spending my love trying to be chosen. I started spending it on the people who already chose us. That's the whole lesson. That's everything. Thank you for sitting with me through all of it. If this reminded you of someone a child made to feel like less, a family that only had room for certain people, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stopped trying to earn a seat at a table where they'd already decided you didn't belong? What finally made you walk away? I read every one. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.